Good afternoon, class. So, welcome to Professional Practice 2. Okay. I suppose that you guys have retained some aspect of your understanding from Professional Practice 1, hopefully. And the same has been useful to you to understand exactly where we will be headed to in Professional Practice 2. Now, before we begin, we will have a small little introduction to what exactly is going to be shown to you as a part of the syllabus. Now, the syllabus states that we will be covering these following topics as a part of your second professional practice. We will be looking at arbitration in module 1. We will be looking at valuation and dilapidation as volume 2. We will be looking at the building industry, finance, and types of insurance as a part of module 3. We will be looking at easements, laws related to property, land tenure, types of land holdings, so on, as a part of module 4. And module 5 will be about general law, rules of courts, and overview of recent bills and acts which are relevant to the practice of architecture, namely the Real Estate Regulation and Development Act, RERA as you know it, the Land Acquisition Act, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act, and the Consumer Protection Act. In addition to this, there are a couple of other acts which we will be talking about with regards to intellectual property. And as a part of Module 3, we will be looking at the industry as it is practiced elsewhere in the world. Basically, how architecture is practiced in other regions of the world. So, now that we have a basic introduction to what your professional practice is going to be for this semester, let us move on towards the lesson itself. So in module 3, what we're going to do is look at the building industry, have a general overview of participants, the dimensions of the building industry, finance, statutory controls, construction procedures, enforcement issues related to the building industry, and the role of the architect, the employer, and the contractor here. Now, after that, we will go towards insurance, talk about the types of insurance necessary during a contract, and the importance of fire insurance. Additional topics that we will be looking at are the nature of the profession across the world and giving you an introduction to what RIBA, AIA, and the Canberra Accord are. So, moving on to the first lesson, we're talking about the building industry right now. Okay. So, what are the important questions that we have to ask as a part of this? We need to know who the participants are. We need to know what their role in the industry is. We need to see how an architect fits into this scheme of things. And we try to look at what the future holds for the industry and its participants. So, as you know, the industry comprises of sectors involving the creation of infrastructure for the purpose of human use. So, anything and everything that we build for the purpose of human consumption, be it housing, dams, highways, railways, harbors, power related structures, warehouses, transit infra, townships, all of these can be classified as the building industry. All right, all of these, the construction of these, the maintenance of these is generally considered to be the building industry in itself. Okay. And keep in mind that we are not just talking about the creation, we're also talking about the maintenance and the upkeep. So these are critical points that you have to keep in mind. If you would have noticed that all of your AD studios have followed the thread of all such projects, right? You would have started with smaller houses, you've started looked at public projects, you've looked at housing, you've looked at transit infrastructure, you've looked at campuses, right? So the general understanding is that there is a lot of investment that has happened as a part in the building industry. So housing and real estate are booming sectors as given by numbers in 2011-2012, growing at nearly 37%. And it also contributes to around 17% of the GDP based again on the numbers of 2011-2012. The growth of the industry has also seen a increase in the requirement for skilled, semi-skilled labor in the organized formal and informal sectors, as well as an enormous number of skilled and unskilled labor in the unorganized sectors. Now, these are things that you guys have to remember when we talk about the industry itself. There are something known as the formal sectors and the informal sectors. Again, we have it in an organized manner as well as in an unorganized manner. Okay, in the organized formal and informal sectors, we have basically the part of the industry that creates design, that creates innovation, and the informal sector is basically that which brings the innovation to some form of fruition. Okay, then skilled and unskilled labor which is required in the unorganized sectors. Unorganized sectors are basically those parts of the labor industry which cannot be easily documented and can do not come under a particular ambit when it comes to taxation, when it comes to classification of labor, so on and so forth. Yeah. As such, it becomes important for us to identify the players and recognize the methods by which the industry is controlled. So, in the present scenario, the players that we have are the following: the government, all the ministries which are involved in the creation of infrastructure, the introduction of legislature to control and promote the building industry, and financial guidelines. The industry, which can be classified under the following heads: material manufacture and sourcing. So here we look at those industries which manufacture raw material for raw material and construction goods, prefabricated elements, the sourcing of natural goods like stone, wood, etc. Anything else. Capital services. Capitals, when we talk about capital services here, we talk about machinery and tools, construction equipment, cranes. Here we are looking at all those services which are served on a B2B basis. So there are two parts of services that we look at. We look at B2C, which is basically business to consumer, and we look at B2B, which is business to business. So in as a part of the building industry over here, most of the things that we look at are B2B services. Okay. Financial institutions for the purpose of securing seed capital to take up building exercises. Then we have labor, where we look at professionals for technical expertise, market exposure, quality control, skilled freemasons for technical work, and semi skilled and unskilled labor to complete the tasks. Then we have statutory control, which is also known as regulatory oversight, through measures taken under various aegis, specifically the Minimum Wages Act, the Workmen Compensation Act, the National Building Code, local bylaws, so on and so forth. These can be considered as our methods in which we ensure that there are no human rights violations, there are no labor violations, there are no violations in terms of building construction, there are no violations in terms of quality control. So these five players are critically and intrinsically involved in the building industry in its present method. Now, understanding that these people exist as a part of the building industry is one thing. Knowing what each one's limitations are is important as well, because understanding the limitations allows us to know exactly where the shortcomings are and contribute accordingly, which will be the next aspect that we will look at. So, in the government, we look at public projects being pushed through without proper consultation of all stakeholders. So, to give you a simple example over here, public consultation would have been the best way to go forward with regards to the construction of the Bangalore Metro project. All right. Now, that is basically a project which has been panned universally because it has gone ahead without proper consultation. Right. In the case of the industry, limited resources leading to black markets, over exploitation of natural reserves. Manufacturer leans towards economically cheaper but ecologically costlier material solutions, and quality control invariably varies when there isn't sufficient oversight. Capital services are also very critical over here. In quickening pace of innovation renders older tech redundant, hence requiring repeated investment and regular scrapping of redundant tech. Finance, increased interest rates leads to lower borrowing, increased GST making it unviable to operate profitably. In the case of labor, there are depleted labor sources as most people suitable to take up unskilled labor end up in other service industries which require similar unskilled labor. Simplest example for this is not necessarily related to the building industry over here, but again, if we look at it, those people who are absolutely essential for the farming industry, the agricultural industry, are leaving the rural areas and coming towards the urban areas in search for jobs, and invariably in ending up in jobs which involve providing services like cab aggregates. Statutory controls are largely archaic and colonial and have not evolved to suit the changing needs of the modern era. Basically, all the bylaws that we have in place for the purpose of regulation and oversight are largely relics of the colonial era, things which have not evolved sufficiently to suit changes that have occurred beyond the logic beyond the logical scope of understanding of how quickly things can evolve. So while we are already looking at the kind of technology which involves bringing Teslas and electric cars into the country, driverless cars, we are still looking at statutory control. We are still looking at statutory control, looking at limiting emissions from diesel vehicles. Okay, so you understand that there are significant gaps between what is possible on a governance level and what is possible on a innovation and on a ground level in terms of innovation. Okay, so how does an architect help in each one of these cases? The first thing that we need to remember is that an architect is an external factor. He influences the way in which each player functions, and he responds to changes. He's supposed to respond to changes a lot better than the administration. Ideally, the architect shall serve the role of catalyzing a better response from each player. So, in terms of the government, through his association with the IIA and the COA, he can help formulate opinions regarding policy change. Through association with NGOs, he can bring change to legislation and rules regarding critical government schemes, namely housing and slum redevelopment, disaster mitigation, housing policy. Regular contributions to print and media can bring awareness of government schemes or problems in regional governance. In the industry, being an entrepreneur, the architect can innovate in products and processes and details, patent them, and either ask the industry to manufacture or can take up manufacturing himself. You would have noticed that a lot of architects end up diversifying into allied fields which are design centric. This is basically allowing us to innovate and come up with newer building techniques. Through research, the architect can suggest new products needed to improve building design and efficiency. We can join private or government organizations to contribute design wise to regulate design processes and execution, like jo- like the building council energy related organizations like the IGBC and GRIHA. The architect can adopt and advocate innovative products in design where clean energy, green building ideas are consciously present in design. In terms of finance, using choice of materials and methods of construction, labor friendly measures, and appropriate use of machinery to deliver an economically viable product. It is not enough that we come up with fancy design and flamboyance in terms of execution. It is also important that we come up with an economically viable product. Even the most exuberant patron will also have a limit in terms of how much he is willing to spend. So, the idea of an architect's understanding of finance is basically using the right choice of materials to come up with an economically viable product within the budget which has been allocated for him. Using design measures to reduce cost of planning, design, execution, and post execution maintenance. advising individuals, organizations, and government to effectively control cost by recommending methods to achieve tax benefits, relief, and incentives so that both industry and users are benefited. So, this is basically architect using his position as an advocate to advise people, individuals who come to him for him to come to either him or her for the purpose of design, recommending methods to achieve tax benefits, reliefs, and incentives. So again, incentives are basically those things where you do something to achieve a slight a discount in terms of tax, property tax, in terms of um, your loan repayment, so on and so forth. Again, it is important that the architect is aware of these kinds of provisions which are there as a part of the system. In terms of labor, systematic planning of the design and construction stage by the architect allows for the employment of skilled and semi skilled labor at appropriate stages, allowing for saving of costs and effectively using machinery. You would have noticed that a lot of projects would have a lot of laborers on site without any logical reason. Again, this is this can be prevented by the architect systematically planning exactly what stage of activity requires what kind of labor, whether it is skilled or semi skilled, and accordingly providing for it in terms of the budget. So this allows us for saving costs, effectively using whatever machinery, because a lot of this machinery has to be rented. So renting renting generally involves a per day rental cost. So efficient planning allows us to appropriately rent machinery, use it, and return it. This again saves us a lot of costs. The architect can also use his expertise to train and raise the skills of the laborers, ensuring that they have sustained employment beyond the scope of the project. This happens in the case of, let's say, unskilled laborers. Now, the architect, upon his discretion, can choose to invest a lot more time in terms of enhancing the skill set of the laborers. This would involve a hands-on approach from the architect, where he gets involved with with the construction aspect itself, directly involved with the construction aspect itself. You would have noticed this kind of an approach being taken up by very specific architects, people who have a niche practice. So this allows for laborers to enhance their skills and then implement it when they are being engaged by architects, some other architects as well. And the laborers can suggest to the new his newer employees these suggestions based upon a based upon the kind of requirements that they come up with. In terms of statutory controls, the architect creates awareness of the presence of such statutory controls to the clients by insisting upon adopting them for building design. Drawing attention of enforcement agencies like the CPWD, state PWD, or local bodies to more efficient practices in design and execution. So, recommending incentives for adopting clean energy, water recycling, and other green energy initiatives at a residential neighborhood level. Through advocacy, innovating and changing existing archaic methods of control and statutory laws. Again, this goes back to what we talked about earlier. The fact that most of the laws that govern how building construction is done, the idea that most of the laws which govern how building construction is done is extremely archaic and derives a lot from colonial methods. So it is necessary for the architect to intervene and bring the necessary kind of attention of the local bodies to more efficient practices in design, so we don't end up with cookie cutter designs like with the economically weaker section housing, EWS housing. Recommending incentives for adopting clean energy. Again, incentives comes either in terms of tax rebates or in terms of more FAR. Incentives are basically these kinds of things which allow you to build more efficiently. Okay. And through advocacy, innovating and changing all of these controls and statutory methods. Now, the future, when we talk about the future, we're talking about a period. When we talk about the future, we're talking about a future that involves the coronavirus. All right. So, factors which are in play over here are basically one, the coronavirus itself, two, our ability to innovate in and around the pandemic, the effects of the pandemic, and three, how to be more inclusive in the wake of a very debilitating disease. All right. So all of these become very key aspects to how we respond and how the industry responds. Anyway, coming back to the presentation itself, the future for government involvement, it has to provide regular updates to industry status on various activities connected to building and construction. It has to develop human resource skills of different types required for building industry, both in formal and informal sectors. It has to encourage younger people to become entrepreneurs, and it has to provide necessary support for budding entrepreneurs. It has to adopt building research in building sciences, materials of construction through academic and research institutions to come up with more innovative techniques for construction. It has to involve public participation in policy making. And it has to completely lean towards the public private participation model, where the government acts only as a facilitator. In terms of finance, financial incentives are to be offered both to individuals and organizations through banks and other institutions, especially towards housing and social infrastructure. Financial incentives to encourage cost saving measures through innovative design and skill generating. The subsidization of loans for innovative design practices, either in technology or in labor friendly measures. Providing labor security through pension schemes for unorganized sectors. In terms of labor, we look at the organization of skill development centers by local bodies, NGOs, to promote better skills, especially in cost saving techniques. Better retirement, health, and social security schemes for laborers. creating statute in terms of statutory controls, legislation to protect both labor and environment revised at regular intervals, and standardization to check the influx of spurious products, as well as testing facilities and tax concessions for better products and innovative methods. So we have come to the end of this presentation over here. Now, I would I would require all of you to briefly summarize this as a précis, which is titled as your interpretation of the building industry, and I would like each one of you to identify where exactly you would like to slot in given these 5 players. All right. Now, if you did not understand that, let me repeat myself over here. You guys are going to be graduating from this course with the title of architect. Now, an architect can either choose to remain the person who facilitates design, the person who will simply create a design and then thereafter not be completely involved over here, or an architect can choose to diversify and move into these various other players of the building industry. All right, choose to be more involved in with these other players of the building industry. So I would like you to summarize this lesson and identify which of these players you would like to be associated with. You will specify exactly what you would like to change, what kind of innovation, what you would like to contribute to each one, to whichever player it is. You will focus upon where you will try to innovate, because even in the government you either can be a person who is empaneled with the government, or you can be somebody who will be involved through an NGO. You can be somebody who, through advocacy planning, gives recommendations to the government with regard to policy changes. You can be empaneled with financial institutions, and you can be the person who gives financial advice to the various stakeholders of a project. You can be a part of a labor. You can be part of a NGO which looks at labor rights. Again, I am laying it out to you in such a manner so that you understand exactly what is the scope of your profession. So you understand that you can diversify and be a lot more than just the simple architect who sits in an office, makes a plan, designs, so on and so forth. Okay. So I would like you to assess the building industry and assess your role as a part of this building industry. That is it for the first lesson. There will be this video which will be uploaded onto YouTube and shared with you, and the voiceover for the presentation will also be uploaded onto the classroom. All right. Thank you for tuning in. See you for the next lesson.